Welcome, everyone. The event is now live. John, please take it away.
Thank you, Allison. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's live Tech Talk, Achieving Resilience, Strengthening Business Through Cyber Incident Preparedness. This event was organized by the hardworking folks at Redmond Magazine, and it's sponsored by Cybersecurity, a leader in AI-powered identity security and cyber resilience for hybrid environments. I'm John K. Waters, Editor-in-Chief in the Converge 360 Group of 1105 Media, and I am joined today by cybersecurity expert and former ransomware negotiator, Jeff Wichman. Hi, Jeff.
Hey, John. Pleasure.
Glad to have you here, man. I'll tell the folks a little bit about you. Jeff has more than 20 years of experience in information security, primarily focused on the digital forensics and incident response lifecycle. As breach preparedness and response director at Cybersecurity, he has worked hundreds of incident response investigations, from relatively small business email compromises to large-scale ransomware incidents. I am really looking forward to this conversation, but before we get going, I need to do just a bit of housekeeping. This Tech Talk is being recorded for later access. Keep an eye out for an email with a link to that recording. It'll be coming your way in the next few days. Our sponsors provided some extra resources you won't want to miss. They're available now on your console. And at the end of our conversation, we'll have a 5 to 10 minute Q&A. Please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box as they occur to you throughout the talk. We'll do our very, very best to get to all of them. Now I'm going to take just one more second, a couple minutes maybe here, to sort of set the stage for what we're going to be talking about. In today's threat landscape, attackers prioritize identity and access management systems like Microsoft's Active Directory because they hold the keys to the kingdom in most enterprises. In other words, compromised AD, and you control the organization. That's why modern cyber resilience strategies must focus on AD hardening, monitoring, and recovery planning. I'm going to be talking with Jeff about those strategies, how organizations can better prepare, respond, and recover when disaster strikes. I'll be asking him about the real-world challenges and consequences of AD compromise, and hopefully he'll offer some actionable guidance for building operational resilience. Okay, my man, my first question for you is, why is Active Directory such a high-value target for attackers? How has that changed over the years?
You said it right in the beginning. It's the keys to the kingdom. As organizations, put in their levels of controls, their layers of controls, typically you've got your domain admins and they have access to everything. If an attacker can elevate from a simple, let's use a phishing attack. If I can get simple creds, I am going to go after Active Directory for gaining domain admin, schema admin, enterprise admin, whatever privileged access I can get so that I can get to more places within the environment. If I come in as an attacker from, let's use a secretary example or help desk. I'm going to, there are a couple of things, and this going back into the ransom negotiations phase, there's a couple of things that the attackers are going to look for. They're going to look at, what's the IP, what's the real critical data that this customer or this client or this company can't live without, and then what's their financial information look like. So the two areas I'm going to go after are usually, like, if it's, well, depending on the company, IT assets, the technology dumps, or if any other company, really, they're going to go after financial information. Can't tell you how. It was actually interesting how dramatic the shift was when I started doing ransom negotiations. The attackers, they snowballed. They $100,000 ransom, and it's a multi-million-dollar company. They did very little research. When I was done, they had, I swear, people who really looked at the financial statements of the companies. They understood what the revenues truly were and what the profits really were. In the beginning, I could, or actually in the middle, I could use, oh, you don't know how to read a financial statement. That just says our revenue. That doesn't tell us really what we make. And, towards the end, they even figured that out. It was always a game of cat and mouse, but Active Directory, like you said, keys to the kingdom.
So What would you say in your experience is the most common point of entry attackers use to compromise AD systems?
Um, so typically I wouldn't say it's a point of entry. Usually they've got a landing target. If it was, accessing credentials, they're going to go after
Mhm.
phishing. That's pretty typical. After that, then there's plenty of ways. Escalation of privileges, um, typically is going to be the obvious one that they're going to look at, and then they're going to look at attack paths from that perspective on how can they get to domain admin. Um,
Mhm.
if you don't have your environment structured correctly or tiered correctly, and a domain admin is logging in as themselves with domain admin credentials, you're caching your credentials, you're leaving little tidbits behind that the attacker can use to escalate their privileges. Um, it's a pretty simple game once they see that an admin has logged into a certain system, and if that admin account is across all systems, it's pretty easy work for these guys and gals, attackers, to make their way through the systems.
Fascinating. What I'm wondering about some like early warning signs that AD has been compromised that organizations often miss.
The big one that I typically see is it's in the logs. Someone got added to the domain admin group. Even if it's for a very short period of time. I did a case years ago where the attacker, unfortunately, by the time they realized that they had been in for 6 or 7 years, the attacker just at night, they would add themselves to the domain admin group, do their work, take themselves out.
Mm.
Something as simple as logging would have caught that and raised the alarm.
Mhm.
Granted, logging is it's some more of a passive, whereas if you have the right tools and technology in place, you can get alerted really when it's happening.
Mm.
So someone gets added to the domain admin group, there's a rule or an alert that's shot off to the security team saying that an account was added to the domain admin group, and then if you get really funky, you can have that change reversed. It's not instantaneously, I don't think, in a majority of cases, but you're saving yourself. You could be saving yourself millions of dollars by having that user removed from AD in the event that it's a malicious attacker. You don't want to give them too much time because they're, like I said, they're very quick.
Amazing. Okay, so what role does privilege escalation play in AD-related breaches, and how can companies detect it early?
That one's a somewhat of a complex. Privilege escalation, it's always out there.
Mhm.
Locking
Maybe
down your credential.
we know what that is, right? Do we have to define
Yep.
that privilege escalation?
So privilege escalation is I, as a general user, am looking for a way to escalate my privileges to, like I said, domain admin,
Right.
schema admin, whatever. Um, if you don't have your Active Directory cordoned off, sectioned off, or tiered off, and as an admin, I can log into any system. It just, like I said, it makes it easier for the attackers. To do it right there's a lot of work behind it, but the value behind that work pays for itself in the end.
Mhm.
If you have your tier 0 assets, your most critical systems locked down, and only systems within tier 0 can access tier 0 systems, it makes it much harder for an attacker to get in. Granted, your IT admins now have to have a system specifically set for them in tier 0 that they can log into,
Mhm.
rather than having my general workstation being able to reach into tier 0. Because if I can do it from my system and reach into tier 0, it means an attacker can as well. So if you tier off your systems and build the correct structure around, typically what we see is 3 different tiers: tier 0 most critical, tier 1 critical, and then tier 2 is basically everything else.
Mhm.
It's the crown jewels example.
Mhm.
You protect those crown jewels as best as you can, and isolate anything trying to get to them. And if you do it right and you see something else trying to get into tier 0, you automatically have an alert that something is wrong. If a domain admin is only supposed to access the system to manage, let's say, AD, or touch a domain controller from a system other than their tier 0 asset, it's an alarm. You've got something going on in the environment that needs to be looked at.
So when we were talking before, you mentioned the resilience mindset.
Yes.
What does that look like in practice for modern enterprises?
Assuming breach.
Assuming breach.
So you have to operate, at least in my mindset, is you have to operate in the mindset of you've been breached. How do you protect and cordon everything off? Being resilient from that perspective is by having that tiering model correctly deployed, everybody using it, especially the critical people really are the ones who are going to be impacted. Having them buy in and only using it this specific way. And then the other part, kind of goes back to I had a discussion with a vendor that does basically greenfields. They help clients recover from incidents, and they rebuild everything from scratch. Why do they rebuild everything from scratch? Because 90% of the backups fail.
Oh, jeez.
If you are not testing your backups and truly testing them from it's on tape, we've restored it, we've been able to access it, you're not going to make it. And then even, a lot of times I see organizations having very detailed disaster recovery plans for financial systems. If we don't have this financial system online in X number of hours, we're doomed. But rarely do I ever see someone saying, if we don't have Active Directory back online, which typically you need Active Directory to get into that financial system. Active Directory, it's the keys to the kingdom. It's literally the first thing that needs to be protected and the first thing that needs to be restored. So the quicker you can bring back Active Directory to the latest specific backup of Active Directory, the better off you're going to fare. You're going back in time for changes that have happened. If you are backing up a full domain controller, putting that server operating system back into doing a recovery takes a lot longer than taking a backup. So if you are restoring from tape, disk, whatever, back to disk, it's going to take you some time. But if you have the ability, such as with ADFR, Active Directory Forced Recovery, we're only backing up Active Directory itself, the critical components of Active Directory. So while you're going through your disaster, you could deploy a new server and then restore that Active Directory component back onto that server, and your Active Directory is back in place. Obviously, you want to do some cleanup in there because that's important. If the attacker's been in there, you don't want to put it back. I've seen that go sideways too many times, where an organization recovers back to what they believe is a good set. Attackers are crafty. They've got something hidden back there, and you want to try to lock it down as best as you can, not just kicking them out from an access that they've had. You want to try to identify other access they might have had.
I guess it almost sort of goes without saying that, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you would encourage people to be proactive rather than reactive when it comes to AD security. But how does an organization make that shift?
Testing, training, and assessing. There's a fine line. So from an assessment perspective, get a review of what Active Directory looks like. Figure out where your weaknesses are, and I can guarantee you have weaknesses, whether you realize it or not. And I would say, and this is kind of my head saying it, 90% of the time, your IT team either knows about a risk but has overlooked it just because they are so used to seeing it and so used to believing that the business will say, we need that functionality. Having an outside party come in and look at something and saying, this is, while you might think this is really necessary, this is super risky. Sometimes that's all it takes to, get the momentum moving in the right direction. And then testing and updating, if you do disaster recovery exercises, and validate that you can restore a server in an X amount of time, how often are you doing it? Are you documenting that you're doing it? Are you identifying the nuances that need to be updated in your plan? Does your plan contain everything that it needs to for, like I said earlier, you've got what the financial team needs for their specific systems, but do you have the details for Active Directory?
Right.
And then most importantly, how can you start moving into a tiered model where your organization has more protection? If you look at an organization that is correctly tiered and admins only use tier 0 assets to access tier 0 assets, if an attacker gets in, what are they going to do? They're going to damage the endpoints. Yes, that will slow you down, but it won't put you out of business. I've seen too many companies literally go out of business because they lost access to their information.
Okay, so these practices you're talking about, I would say it's fair to say reflect a mature organization when it comes to cyber incident preparedness. Is there anything else that would characterize a mature organization?
Whoa, that's a tough one. I've seen what I had assumed were very mature organizations that have something that is overlooked.
Sure.
Look at yeah, it's on the screen now. I thought I saw it. CISA, they were the what I call the golden, they made the rules of what it is to protect data. They got compromised. If an attacker has the will, they will get in. How much damage they do, that's up to you. I think CISA was pretty mature, and hopefully, knock on wood, had everything locked down in pretty quick order. But there's nothing to say that you are 100% guaranteed that you will not get attacked. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of when.
So that brings me, what would you say are the biggest misconceptions companies have about their ability to recover from a breach?
Backups work. And it's not a bash and it's not a bash on the backups. But you think, if we've been doing backups for how long we've been doing backups in IT, that it would be, we would have 100% win rate, but that's not the case. Attackers know where backups are. If you do have good backups, they are going to destroy them. And then if you have offsite backups, you need to wait for those backups to get back. The clock's ticking against you. You can't do that in the health industry. You can't rely on data, tape backups to be, shipped back to you so that you can recover your operations. It wouldn't work in healthcare. It's a tough one. There's no guarantees.
Yeah. So which tools or platforms do you recommend for real-time monitoring and anomaly detection in AD environments?
So specifically revolving around AD, any type of SIM, you can take Microsoft logs and pump them to syslog, any system. Building the correlation, making sure that it's always working. That's the big piece, or that's a big piece. The real-time monitoring and I'll call it counteractions, something like Directory Services Protector, where it's monitoring the changes that are being made within Active Directory, and it's not doing it based off of logs, it's doing it based off of the replication stream. So if an attacker, if thought process being, background in forensics, if I gain access into something, the first thing I'm going to do is destroy the tracks that show that I got it. So I'm going to go into the log system. I'm going to destroy the logs. If I can do that before the logs make it to the syslog server, I'm effectively still in the dark doing what I want to do. That's where pulling it from the replication stream with DSP, the attacker can go and destroy it in the logs all they want. We've already got a copy of it. And then having that ability to, restore that or, restrict that access, take that access away from an attacker. That's the other big piece. Honestly, at this day and age, anybody who has disk space is cheap. So cheap. You should be able to send your AD logs, even if it's just your AD logs, and have auditing turned on and set correctly. You should be able to catch the anomalies. Someone logging in from, if I log in from Tokyo and then 15 minutes later I'm logging in from New York, something's amiss. Something's not right.
That's right.
It's the impossible. I think we used to call it the impossible travel syndrome. If you can't travel that far that fast, there's no reason you should be logging into it. Granted, if you have some VPN service that you're using, might bounce you around like that. But at the same time, if I'm logging into my corporate system, I should be using the corporate VPN, not another VPN. So it should be always, or not always, but for the most part, pretty static of where I'm coming from, unless I travel a lot. But then it's the impossible travel.
Right. I love that phrase. So how important is segmentation within AD structures to mitigate blast radius in an attack?
It means everything. If I can't get to crown zero, if I can't get to the crown zero or tier zero, the crown jewels, I can't do damage to it. I can take out your, I can take out your help desk. I can take out your users who access the data, which is, that's somewhat impacted by the blast radius. But if the data is intact and the attacker didn't A, exfiltrate it, or B, encrypt it, or C, destroy it, you still have a leg in the game. You still can recover quicker. Even from a perspective, if an attacker encrypts everything around it, if AD is still there, you still can get some of the information back. Or let me phrase this differently. If I, as an attacker, destroy your environment via encryption event, I still have organizational backups that I can recover to. Granted, it's still going to be a little bit slower. I can bring those files back. I, as an organization, I keep using I as every person in here, so I'm attacking myself. But if the organization has the ability to do what we call greenfield, that is, build everything new. Everything starts from scratch. I rebuild all my servers. I rebuild all my users. All my new groups. Now I have to go and manually figure out what the permissions are on all of those folders, all of those settings, and I have to, put them back in. And it's not a one-to-one, because if I build a new environment, I get a new SID. Everything starts from scratch. All the ACLs are different. However, if we do brownfield, where we bring back Active Directory, we clean Active Directory, all the users are still there, all the groups are still there, all the permissions, the permissions are on the files, but the SIDs have not changed. So now we put that AD back in place, and all of your files are accessible with the same user accounts, same group memberships. You've taken weeks and months worth of work for greenfield down into days, possibly, of brownfield. And that's where I see the biggest bang. Honestly, that's what brought me here to Paris.
Really?
Yeah, one of the last cases I did from a digital forensics perspective, the client decided they were going to greenfield everything. And they were down for, I want to say, about 6 months.
Oh, God.
Yeah, and it was a critical industry. It wasn't something that, is easily manageable via paper. They may do somehow. I still haven't figured out how. But if they would have been able to recover Active Directory and put the controls back in place on all the files, because they had all the files.
Yeah.
They did it by choice of, we want to rebuild everything. I think a big piece behind it was also the admin left in the midstream of the incident. Which is, that's the unforeseen, and always that's always my worst case scenario in the middle of an incident is your critical person who knows everything about your environment decides, I've had it, I don't want to do it. And they walk away. There's nothing you can do to bring them back. Yeah. You basically choke yourself out. And when I got to Simperis, one of our first IR cases, or identity forensics, we were working in conjunction with an IR firm. The IR firm was working on containing and deploying their tools to the endpoints. We got contacted on a Friday night. We were engaged. We got a backup of Active Directory. They had one domain controller that was still functional. By Saturday evening, we were ready to roll that back into production, that Active Directory, in a more secure state. And the IR provider was like, we're not ready yet. We haven't got containment on our side completely. So you're looking at, we were ready to roll this customer back, and they had about 5,000 users, so which is a pretty typical case. We were ready to roll them back into production in about 24 hours. I think ultimately it was Sunday night we rolled them back, with obviously working in conjunction with the IR vendor. And I sit back and I kind of thought about it like, this is, granted, there were two very different industries, but the user makeup was about the same. And one took 6 months and one took a weekend.
Wow.
I mean, you do the math on how long do you want to be down?
Right. Okay, so what's your perspective on automated response systems for ID-based threats? Is the tech mature enough?
Yes, I think the tech is. Obviously, you have to do some very fine tuning. You got to make sure that you have, a way out. Typically, what you want to do in those cases, though, is you're not fully automating identity remediation, I'll say.
Right.
You are building a baseline, just like trying to think what user anomaly behavior back in the day. You had to build a baseline before you could put it into production. Same as an IPS. You got to build a baseline of what you're doing. So if you bring in automated detection and remediation from an AD perspective, you got to give it a little time to learn what's right and wrong. You also have to have your critical admins that they have access. They are part of that group. That's a pretty easy one, though, is the domain admins. You know who that group is, and that's a pretty easy one to shift into place of like, this is the group. Leave this group alone. Don't let anyone get added to it. If someone does get added and removed, they're going to know real quick. And they know, typically the identity team's going to know right away, like, oh yeah, we need to add that person manually to the remediation system so that they don't get taken out of the group right away. But yeah, I think they are. I think the identity automation is at a good spot, at least from the remediation perspective. Obviously, there's always going to be something out there that can catch you, so you have to get what I call the get out of jail free card. You have to know something's going to go wrong, and then what I would say the most critical is, if you do have automation or remediation, don't join it to the domain. Because if an attacker gets a hold of it and they put in rules to remove everybody from a domain admin group, you're using your tools against yourself.
Right.
So sometimes, and unfortunately, we've run into these cases where a customer has this great idea on putting this XYZ in place. And then unfortunately, they don't think about the repercussions of what an attacker will do with it if the attacker gets access into it.
Right. So we've talked a little bit about this, but I just want to double check on this. What are your thoughts on backup and restore strategies specifically for AD? I'm thinking, what works, what doesn't?
Backing up the bare minimum of Active Directory is what's important.
Okay.
You want to detach it from the operating system. If I get the entire operating system, you're talking gigs upon gigs of data that I have to back up. And ultimately, if there's an incident, I have to restore that. Whereas if I have the Active Directory critical components, GPOs, those critical assets, I can take that and put it down on a new server in isolation and, do the cleanup, fix vulnerabilities that might exist within Active Directory. I can get there a lot faster. I still think backups are very important of general operating systems and, the data behind it. I don't know if the operating systems are as critical anymore. I think the more critical of a backup is just the data. But that's just me. I can lay down I can do an install of a server faster than I can do a restore of a server. So I look at it from a perspective of I only want to capture the very critical data, and I want to be able to put that down on whatever I want. So if I want to go from a 2008 R2 server, and I want to go to, 2024, whatever the latest and greatest is, I should have that option without having to worry as much about, if I do this, I'm going to run into this issue that's got to, because if it takes manual, I have to get involved and make manual tweaks and manual settings, then what's the point? It should be agnostic to what I'm putting it back on.
So you worked as a ransomware negotiator, and I'm just wondering, what's the most surprising thing you've learned from those experiences?
Attackers are evil. They don't care. I chuckle a little bit when I say it. The attackers are vicious. They know what they're doing. They don't mess around. Some of them are downright, I won't say it. They're just evil people. If I look at it from a perspective of, if I was a malicious person, would I willingly attack a children's hospital, knowing that I could kill someone, and not care too much, not care about it? I've had so many cases where it's been, in the healthcare industry, hospital, children's hospital, whatever, and talking to the attackers, they're like, "We don't care. Give us money." And to me, it's just like, that just doesn't compute in my head. It's like they don't have the morals, and they don't have a heart. Because I can't. Maybe it's because I have kids, but I can't imagine attacking something and demanding money and extorting money out of something where kids are at risk. It just doesn't compute in my head. But attackers, they don't care.
Yeah, it's a special kind of bad.
Okay. 100%.
So I'm wondering, how do attackers typically move laterally once they're inside an organization's identity infrastructure?
Yeah, so typically what you're going to be looking at from that perspective is an attacker is going to do some kind of reconnaissance in the environment, figure out who the domain admins are, who the critical people are, who's got access, and they're going to go after those accounts. There are a number of tools out in the industry that can highlight that type of information. Forest Druid from Simperis is one of those. We look at it from a defender view. And basically what you do is you run it against Active Directory, and it tells you all of the little paths that you could take to get from, general user or general system into a tier 0 asset, a domain admin, or high value target, as we call it. What we typically see the most is your help desk. Your help desk is one of the, it's the Achilles heel. I, as a help desk individual, have to be able to reset passwords for, anybody who calls me. Well, if I'm a domain admin, should a help desk person be able to reset a domain admin's password? Help desk is generally a regular, a elevated permissions user, but should they have the ability to change a domain admin password? There should be some type of separation there where the help desk is now considered, tier 1, tier 0, where they have a secondary system that can only identify with the identity management system for resetting passwords, and building in that layer. This is probably one of the most common things I see in our reports, is the help desk attack.
So I'm wondering this comes up in a bunch of different contexts, but how critical is cross-team collaboration? I'm thinking between IT, security, and leadership during a cyber incident.
It means everything. I've been in situations where IT was running the show, and if they're not updating the leadership team in a timely manner, that the leadership team would come to the IR group and ask what's going on. Why aren't they getting updates? If there is not communication across all of the spectrums that would be required, when I say that, I think of risk, compliance, executive leadership, sometimes finance, even HR, and IT, of course, because IT is doing the legwork. If there's not a cross-team collaboration with that group, typically it's a lot harder to work with, more prone to failure. And my biggest worry is always, is the IT team truly telling the executives what is going on, or are they trying to save face? Almost every case that I've walked into from an IR perspective, it takes a lot of effort to tell the IT team that we are here to help. We're not here to point fingers and point blame. We're here to help you fix and recover. But sometimes that message never made it to the leadership team. And, unfortunately, those were the ones where things weren't fixed. Things weren't corrected. They weren't given the budgetary that they needed to make things truly right. And, they would call us back in a couple of months.
So what kind of training should companies provide to help their employees recognize and respond to ID-related threats?
There has to be some type of security awareness training, obviously, in just about every organization by this point. And if there's not, please get some in place. From the user perspective, yes, it's boring. Yes, it's a pain to go through on a yearly basis and recertify that what to look for. Employees should be tested from phishing exercises, as well as even from an internal perspective of organizations doing attacks against themselves. Bringing in a red team, having the red team start with an asset internally and see what they can do. If you don't assess and you don't train, you are bound to, get the worst experience in the IR world.
So we were talking about AI before we logged on, and of course, everybody's talking about AI. How do you see the role of AI evolving in the context of ID threat detection and response?
It's critical. AI can act a lot faster than I can. I'm not saying it's going to replace people. I think it's going to be like I mentioned when we were chatting, it's my assistant. I use it from a perspective of helping me do my job better. If we can take AI and look for the common scenarios and attack scenarios, it's just going to make us a lot stronger and a lot better at protecting our assets. However, at the same time, Attackers are going to be using AI to beat us.
Right.
My perspective is we're going to win or we're going to lose. Is what's going to matter the most is who's using it first and figuring out the right way. And time will tell.
Okay, maybe the last question I think I have for you is,
Yeah.
I often ask this, what piece of advice would you give to companies just starting to take cyber resilience seriously, particularly around AD?
Do your diligence. Don't just talk to, a single company about what it means. And then I would say that the second piece is, talk to organizations that have the tools available for download that you can test out and you can kick the tires on. I mentioned Forest Recovery. Forest Druid, freely available on the Simperis website, as well as Purple Knight. Purple Knight is a tool that any organization running Active Directory can download. It does not phone home. The most we're asking for is your email address so that we know you downloaded it. Run it against your environment. You will get some surprising results of where your weaknesses are. That's the first step. Identifying your weaknesses and acknowledging that they're out there, and not turning a blind eye to what's out there. You have to start taking action, even the minimal stuff. And then, of course, if anyone wants to reach out to me, I am more than happy to jump on a 5-10 minute call and see what I can help with. And then, of course, if I would say, and this goes all the way back through all my IR days, please do not wait until Friday to call your IR provider. If it happens on Monday, don't fight. Don't assume that you're going to be able to do it. Get your IR provider involved early, and typically you're going to get a lot better result.
That's great advice. Okay, well, that's all the questions I have for you. Let's get to some questions from our attendees. I want to remind everyone that you can type your questions into the Q&A box at any time. We'll do our best to get to all of them. We got kind of a bunch here. Let's start with this one from Al, who's wondering what is IFIR and how does it differ from DFIR?
Yeah, so that's a great one. Identity Forensics Incident Response. So, in DFIR, Digital Forensics Incident Response, that is a very big gamut of what an IR firm is looking at. They're looking at Windows systems, Linux systems, Mac systems. They're looking at artifacts on the endpoints. They're looking at server logs, network logs, firewall logs. They have a very big space that they're working in. Typically, they had specialties. Before doing IR or doing ransomware negotiations, I was in Windows forensics, a little bit of Linux, and then log analysis. Those were what I would call somewhat specialties. This is just, I wouldn't even call it a new branch. We are very focused on protecting the identity and figuring out what the attacker might have done from the identity perspective so that you can recover your identity stores in a faster, safer, more secure environment.
Okay, here's one from Jake, who's wondering, what if hackers get the weak spot before I do?
Yeah, that's always a tough one. If the attackers get there before you do, it's unfortunately it's part of the game. And I don't mean game in a negative connotation. It's part of business as the way I look at it. Organizations are going to find their weak spots and correct them, or the attackers are going to find the weak spots and attack them. If an attacker gets there and attacks it before you do, it's nice to have a backup so that you can recover and clean and fix. Whereas if you don't have anything in place, attacker can. There's a couple of options. The attackers are going to look at ransoming your environment, stealing your information, or shutting you down. That's really what it is. Oh, well, I guess there's the alternative, which I don't think I've ever seen, is the attacker leaves you alone. if the attacker leaves you alone, that would be odd. That would be really odd. But in the grand scheme of things, you have to do something and try to get ahead of the attackers. I'm not saying anyone's ever going to get all the way ahead, but steps have to be taken, and it has to be a process. It's not something that's one and done. The way I look at it is,
Right.
if we do an assessment against the company's AD and they take action and fix everything that we told them, in 6 months, something is going to happen within that environment that either makes a new vulnerability pop up or something else. A new domain admin gets brought in and they change a setting that, makes it risky again. It has to be iterative. It has to be continually looked at. And who knows, maybe even making a change to secure something opens up a new weakness just on its own. So you have to keep looking.
Makes sense. Okay, Willow was wondering, pointing directly to the title of our talk today, how can small business strengthen business through cyber? Whoops, somebody yanked it away through cyber incident preparedness.
Yeah,
just applying this stuff to small business, I guess.
Yeah, from a small business perspective, if you have small business, you're either running an on-prem AD or you're using Entra and you have it set up there. The tools I mentioned, Purple Knight, Forest Druid, these are tools that are out there that are available. You download them and run them. See what it tells you. If you need help with Forest Druid, I'll give the caveat of Forest Druid is a steep learning curve. It will take some time to understand and view the data. But any organization has the ability to download these tools and look at them. If you don't have IT staff and you don't have people who know, sometimes then it's best to work with I don't want to call it a managed service provider, but a firm that handles these things for you. One thing one piece that comes to my mind is Active Directory in AWS market space. You can pay for Amazon to manage your AD. Typically they're going to take care of the vulnerabilities and look at your weaknesses. I would imagine Microsoft has something similar, but there are plenty of opportunities out there that, if you do a little bit of work on trying to identify what's out there for the small business, it can take you a long way. And again, Willow, if you're out there and listening, feel free to email me, jeffw@simparish.com. If you can't find anything, I will see what I can do and I'll help you.
Thank you. So speaking of advice, Cora is wondering, what advice can you give to someone who is just going into cybersecurity?
Yeah, that's a good one, Cora. Prepare. And I know it sounds generic. There are so many different avenues that you can take on a journey into cybersecurity. You've got red teams, vulnerability, you got research, you've got digital forensics, you got incident response, you got Linux, you got Windows. I would say find what truly I'll call it pulls at the heartstrings, what you really get enjoyment from. And I really mean that from what you get enjoyment from. If you look, I looked at logs, and originally I loved digging into logs and figuring out what the logs were telling me. Fast forward, 10 years into my career, if I had to look at a log file, did not like it anymore. Find what your passion is and go after it. And there are plenty of resources out there for anyone to get an understanding, and I'll call it a basic level understanding of cybersecurity. Breaking into the cybersecurity job market sometimes is a little bit more daunting. Of course, same goes out to you. If you have problems or if you need any specific insight or you want some specific help, please reach out. I'm more than happy to even jump on a call and talk to you.
You're a generous man, my friend. Okay, we've got a kind of back to the grind here question from Perry, who's wondering, Jeff, what are the biggest challenges of recovering AD to a secure state?
The biggest challenge I would say is, and I'm gonna put this on a spin a little bit. The biggest challenge that I think exists is organizations will bring back AD on a live system. They won't isolate it. They won't bring it back into a virtual lab that has no connection to the outside world and then do their cleanup. They bring it straight into, a production environment. You think about it. I went through this so many times, and it was unfortunate, where organizations would just recover to the same system. We're going to blow this one away, and we're going to use that same disk LUN. We're going to restore that server to that disk, and they would just start, putting the OS and everything back down on it, and lo and behold, the attacker's still in the environment. Or, I go way back into the NIMDA days and Code Red of, the worm is just continually spreading. So the minute that system comes back online, if it's not patched and not secure, boom, attackers are already on it. Bringing it back into isolation, running Purple Knight on that isolated instance of Active Directory and getting an idea of where your vulnerabilities are and starting to take corrections. That goes a long way. And then I think the biggest fear, and it's more of a fear on recovering Active Directory, is what breaks if we make a change in isolation. I look at Active Directory experience in the world. I think we have the most MVPs from Microsoft on Active Directory alone, from a research or security, whatever it might be. Find your experts, and they can give you a lot of guidance. The Hybrid Identity Protection Conference and podcast series that's on this page here as well. Great resource for understanding other aspects behind AD and recovery. But yeah, I'd have to leave it at, organization not understanding how to bring Active Directory back in a safe and secure manner, as well as having the tools for doing the assessment.
Well, my friend, that's all the time we have for this episode of our Tech Talk, Achieving Resilience, Strengthening Business Through Cyber Incident Preparedness. I want to thank Jeff Wichman for an informative conversation, and many, many thanks to the folks at Paris for making this conversation possible. Jeff, this was fascinating. Thank you so much.
Loved it. Thanks for having me.
And thanks, everyone, for attending, and have a great day.
Cheers.